You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. The term Century of Humiliation refers to a dark chapter in Chinese history that began with the First Opium War in 1839 and concluded in 1945, or by another measure, 1949, with the establishment of the People's Republic of China. This century was characterized by the decline and fall of the Qing dynasty and the struggles of the Republic of China, leading to a period when foreign powers, including Western countries, Russia and Japan, dominated, divided and degraded China through military defeats and imposing treaties. The label humiliation conveys how this era incited a strong sense of nationalism in China, particularly in response to Japan's 21 demands in 1915 and the unfair treatment China received in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Both major Chinese political parties of the time, the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party, united against these injustices, protesting the unequal agreements and loss of Chinese territory to foreign control. The term gained popularity during the 1930s and 1940s as Japan invaded China, solidifying the sentiment of national disgrace. Despite the conclusion of these unequal treaties, the memory of this century of humiliation remains a significant element of Chinese nationalism today, often cited by both government leaders and in popular culture. It highlights a period of intense suffering and resilience, influencing how China perceives its historical narrative and its role in the global community. In the early 20th century, Chinese nationalists pinpointed the start of the Century of Humiliation to the mid-1800s, right before the First Opium War kicked off a period of severe political instability for China under the Qing dynasty. This era was marked by a series of defeats China faced against foreign powers, leading to significant national disgrace and loss of sovereignty. Here are the pivotal moments and losses that delineated this century. 1. The opium trade, primarily by Western powers and Japan, plagued China from the 1800s to the 1940s. 2. China's defeat in the First Opium War from 1839 to 1842 to the British, which resulted in Hong Kong's occupation. 3. The imposition of unequal treaties like those of Nanjing, Whampoa, Aigun and Shimonoseki, heavily disadvantaging China. 4. The Second Opium War from 1856 to 1860 led to another defeat by Anglo-French forces, including the pillaging of the Old Summer Palace. 5. During the same war, China was forced into signing the Aigun and Peking treaties, giving away Outer Manchuria to Russia. 6. The Sino-French War from 1884 to 1885 saw China lose control over Vietnam, diminishing its influence in Indochina. 7. The British Sikkim expedition in 1888 added to the defeats. 8. Losing the First Sino-Japanese War from 1894 to 1895 resulted in Japan taking over Taiwan and establishing control over Korea. 9. The Russian occupation of Liaodong in 1898, as per the Pavlov Agreement. 10. An international coalition, the Eight-Nation Alliance, invaded to quell the Boxer Uprising from 1899 to 1901, forcing China to pay crippling reparations through the Boxer Protocol. 11. A simultaneous Russian invasion of Manchuria in 1900 led to massacres and expulsions of Chinese inhabitants. 12. Japan's invasion of Liaodong during the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. 13. The British expedition to Tibet from 1903 to 1904. 14. Japan's 21 demands in 1915, seeking to extend its control over China. 15. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 transferred German territories in China to Japan, sparking the May 4th movement against imperialism. 16. Japan's invasion of Manchuria from 1931 to 1932 and the Soviet invasion of Xinjiang in 1934 further weakened China. 17. The brutality of the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945, including the Nanjing Massacre and inhumane experiments by Unit 731, showcased the depth of China's suffering. Throughout these years, China faced internal division, lost nearly every conflict it entered, and was compelled to make substantial concessions. These included paying large reparations, opening ports to international trade, and ceding territorial control to foreign powers, actions that significantly eroded China's sovereignty and placed it under various foreign spheres of influence. Back in 1901, when the Boxer Protocol was concluded, some Western countries felt they may have gone too far and humiliated China more than necessary. To address this, U.S. Secretary of State John Hay introduced the open door policy. This policy aimed to keep China open to trade from all countries without allowing any one nation to completely take over. Though intended to curb the influence of Germany, Japan, and Russia, the policy wasn't fully enforced and faced challenges during China's warlord era and Japanese interference. Critics pointed out that while the policy was meant to protect China's borders, it also opened the door for those same nations to exploit China in trade. In a move to reinforce this policy, the US and Japan agreed on the Root-Takahira Agreement in 1908. However, issues like immigration restrictions and the way the Boxer indemnity was handled, turned into a scholarship fund instead of being returned directly, continued to be sources of tension for China. During the time of the Republic of China on the mainland, efforts like the 1922 Nine-Power Treaty tried yet struggled to maintain Chinese sovereignty and didn't really stop Japan's aggressive expansion or fully remove extraterritorial rights. Everything changed in World War II when Japan's invasion led to the end of the open door policy. It wasn't until 1943 that the United Kingdom and the USA gave up their extraterritorial rights. Meanwhile, France, under Vichy rule, kept its concessions in China until being forced to hand them over to a pro-Japanese regime. The post-war period saw the Sino-French Accord in 1946, which recognized China's control over these areas. The narrative of China overcoming a century of humiliation emerged prominently around this time, with leaders like Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong marking the end of foreign dominance through various declarations. Chiang highlighted China's resistance against Japan and its new status among the world's leading nations in 1945, while Mao celebrated the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 as the final nail. However, the story didn't end there. Later events like China's stand against United Nations forces in the Korean War, the return of Hong Kong in 1997, Macau in 1999, and hosting the 2008 Summer Olympics were also seen as moments that further erased this historical humiliation. Today, some voices in China argue that true sovereignty won't be achieved until Taiwan is under control from the mainland. Recently, as of 2021, during talks with the United States in Alaska, Chinese officials have started referring to these struggles as 120 years of humiliation, linking back to the heavy reparations demanded by the Eight-Nation Alliance in the Boxer Protocol of 1901. The concept of the Century of Humiliation plays a significant role in the historical perspective of the Chinese Communist Party and in shaping modern Chinese nationalism. This concept emphasizes the importance of maintaining the sovereignty and integrity of China's territory. It has been referenced during various incidents, such as the United States bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, the Hainan Island incident, and during protests for Tibetan independence that occurred along the route of the 2008 Beijing Olympics torch relay. Analysts have noted that this narrative is often employed to shift focus away from external criticism of China's human rights record and internal issues such as corruption. Additionally, it supports China's territorial claims and underscores its growing economic and political power on the global stage. Experts often point out that during the 19th century, the Qing dynasty was mainly vulnerable to foreign powers because of its weak navy, even though it had success in land battles against Western forces. Historian Edward L. Dreyer has highlighted this point by saying China's 19th century humiliations were strongly related to her weakness and failure at sea. At the beginning of the First Opium War, there wasn't even a unified Chinese navy, making China extremely exposed to attacks from the sea. The British Navy could basically go where they pleased. During the Second Opium War, China couldn't stop the Anglo-French naval forces in 1860 from getting close to Beijing by sea. On the other hand, China did manage to put down internal rebellions, come to a peaceful agreement with Russia over border issues, and even beat French forces on land during the Sino-French War. However, losses at sea, posing a threat to shipping routes to Taiwan, forced China to agree to peace terms that weren't in its favor. Another historian, Jane E. Elliott, counters the oversimplified view that China was either unwilling or unable to modernize its military or defeat Western armies. She points out that after several military defeats, China undertook significant steps towards modernizing its military in the late 1800s, purchasing weapons from Western nations and producing its own in places like the Hanyang Arsenal, especially noticeable during the Boxer Rebellion. Elliot also challenges the notion that the victories by Western countries traumatized Chinese society. She notes that for many Chinese peasants, who made up 90% of the population and lived outside the foreign-controlled areas, life went on as usual without any direct impact or feeling of humiliation from these defeats. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.